Hello there, ladies and gentlemen, and all the beings in between. Guess who's back? Have you finished guessing yet? It's me! That's right. Now I hear you ask, where have you been for the past 6 months? Wouldn't you like to know, weather boy? But no, I've been very busy over the past 6 months, okay? Which is why I haven't made a video, obviously. I've been doing some really important things like getting old, doing my A-levels, and, riding Mandrill Mayhem, which is far more important than the other ones. But that's not important right now, because you know what is important? What I'm doing in this video. I'm going to bring you some controversial opinions, hot takes if you will, because there's nothing better to welcome me back to the platform than making everyone hate me with some awful opinions. But that's enough talking for right now, because let's get into these horrible opinions with... That's right, you read that correctly. Unless of course you didn't read it, at which point go back 10 seconds. Unless of course you can't read it, at which point it said Wickerman has a bad layout. Which I thoroughly believe in. But Theme Park Bean, I hear you say because you all sound like that. But I thought it was in your top 10, what do you mean it has a bad layout? Yes, it is in my top 10, it's currently number 9. But that placement is purely for everything around the ride and one particular part of the layout, which I'll get to in a minute. The soundtrack, the pre-show, the theming, that is all incredible. That is worthy of number 9. But the layout itself is not. And I can think of no better way to introduce you to this absolutely terrible layout than to just run through the whole thing in a quick-fire segment. Firstly, we have the pre-lift. It is nothing special, you get thrown around a bit, which I guess is fun, but otherwise nothing special. The lift hill is wonky, and you kind of bounce up it for some reason. It is very fun to watch everyone go, whoa, 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 as they go up the lift. It's very strange. You then reach the first drop, which does nothing because you don't have enough speed going into it. The first airtime hill is okay sometimes if you get the correct row. However, every time without fail I'm on row 7, so I never get the good row. And then we reach, get ready for this, the one good part of the layout. That S-bend drop goes insanely hard. We love the S-bend drop. You just get whipped to one side and then the other, and what's that? You're going now very fast. Spectacular. However, you know what's not spectacular? What comes directly after, the long drawn-out turn until you hit the Wickerman. I get this turn kind of has to be there to lead into the rest of the layout, but this is probably the most boring part of the whole ride. Except, no it's not, because now we reach the most boring part of the whole ride. You go through the Wickerman and come into this big, like, banked turn, which just does nothing. You get to look at the queue below you, I guess. But this turn and the few little bunny hills after it are useless. Genuinely awful. They could have done so much more with this. But just, I haven't even started on could have done so much more with this. Just you wait till we get to a certain flat piece of track later in the ride. You then drop to the right through the Wickerman, which I'll admit that is quite a good element. You then head over this weird drawn out airtime hill, which doesn't do anything, into what I'd say is the worst part of the whole layout. Genuinely, John Wardley, you did not cook here, I'm afraid. Just kidding, John, I love you, you did a really good job. You hit this slow, boring, flat turn, which just does nothing. This is the most useless part of the ride ever. What is the point? They could have done something so much better in this space. At least like make it bumpy so there's some chance, a risk of airtime. But it's just this boring flat turn which does nothing. And then after that you reach, admittedly, quite a good drop on the back row from the one back row ride I've had, into a smaller airtime hill which once again does nothing. Back through the Wickerman, you get soaked by the mist a third time, you head round into another weird drawn-out airtime hill, and then from there, you reach the sequel to the flat turn, in this weird flat, not quite a brake run, but a brake run. I don't know what is the point of that? It's essentially a brake run, which you travel through too fast for it to be a brake run, and it has a turn in the middle for some reason. So overall, there is so much more they could have done with this layout. Especially one particular part of the layout, who I shall not name again. You know who you are, flat turn! Anyway, I'll move on. I'm looking out my window and I can see an angry mob of Wickerman fanboys on the way. So I'll move on to the next opinion, which is... Now, there's a slight battle in the UK coaster community of what is the worst coaster at Thorpe. And most people seem to converge on either Soar or Colossus. However, I've come to give my very original take. Colossus isn't that bad. In fact, I'd say there is 3 coasters, for me at least, in the running for the worst at Thorpe. Excluding, of course, Flying Fish and Walking Dead, because they're both really good and I said really nice things about them here. And those 3 are Soar the Ride, because it's rough, awful, and just rough. If I hadn't mentioned it's rough yet, it's really rough. Nemesis Inferno, because out of all the coasters there, it's the only one that doesn't really do anything special, but it's still an objectively pretty good ride. and I'm going to get absolutely hung, drawn, and quartered for this. I can already see the pitchforks being raised outside. That Wicker Man mob has turned into a stealth mob because it's stealth. I genuinely think stealth is in the running for the worst coaster at Thorpe. But hold on, do not throw a flaming torch through my window just yet. Give me a minute. The reason I think stealth is in the running for the worst coaster at Thorpe is because, in my opinion, a coaster needs substance. And stealth has none of that. Sure, the launch is amazing, the airtime can be as good as you want, but if the ride's only 3 seconds long, it's over before you've even had time to process that it started. And every time I hit the brake run, I'm just left wondering, why did I queue half an hour for 3 seconds of ride time? What the ride has is really good. It just doesn't have much of it. I don't know if this is like the objectively wrong way to look at coasters, and that was in heavy air quotes there, you can't see me, but there was very big air quotes there. The wrong way to think about and rank coasters, of just, oh, the coaster's not long enough, so it's not good enough. But no, if I'm gonna queue half an hour for a ride, I'd like that ride to at least last long enough for me to think about what's going on. Stealth is just over before anything even can happen. Now, does something like Inferno or Colossus have a good layout? Not particularly. Although, don't get me wrong, those 4 Heartline rolls are incredible. Now, those 2 rides don't have a standout moment or something like Stealth Launch to get them going. But what they do have is the length to, like, actually back up their experience. Stealth has nothing. Stealth has a launch and then the ride ends. Which is why there's stuff like the big one in my top 10, but not Stealth. Because sure, the big one doesn't have a great layout, but the ride itself is long enough to warrant you queuing that long because it gives you an equally long ride experience, which is then, in turn, more enjoyable than queuing half an hour for a ride that's really good for like a second, and then it just ends. Anyway, I'm gonna move on. The 2 mobs outside are now arguing about something, which, to be honest, doesn't surprise me. This is the theme park community we're talking about. What's that? A 3rd angry mob has showed up, and this one is the entire coaster community. Oh no! That's right. If a ride is rough or has a rattle, that does not make it bad. I get so annoyed every time I see this. Let's take a recent example, right? Hyperia. Spectacular ride. Maybe it has a slight rattle on some parts of it, but that does not impact the ride experience in any meaningful way. I've seen loads of people, ride comparisons, there's just one example, that complain so much about the roughness and how it ruins the ride. Hyperia is not rough. There is maybe a slight rattle for one tiny part of the layout, but that is not enough to ruin the ride. In my opinion, a rattle improves a ride because it gives the ride character. If every ride was perfectly smooth, ran like a monorail, then where's the point in it? You might as well just be watching a POV while sat in your chair. But if a ride has a slight bump and rattle, that lets you know you're on the coaster. That separates it from just sitting there and watching a video. Feeling the track under you, like feeling the wheels rattle around on said track, it's not painful. It just gives the ride character. Now, it's not all good, though. That I will admit, there is bad roughness. Case in point, Grand National. Grand National is a ride that, in theory, has a really good layout, but it's so rough, you can't enjoy that layout because it hurts. I think there's a sort of meter for roughness. At the low point, there's a rattle, which is good. It gives the ride character. It stops it from being boring. Then there's slightly rough, like Smiler, but that doesn't detract from the ride. It's just the occasional, ow, I hit my head. And then we have so rough it ruins the ride, such as Grand National or Odyssey. Let me pull up an example of a ride that's so smooth, it actually detracts from the ride. And that's Minifigure Speedway at Legoland. Because when you have a ride like Minifigure Speedway that has nothing to offer forces-wise, a little bit of roughness or bounciness or rattle would genuinely add something to the experience. But no, it didn't have anything. It was perfectly smooth, but it had no forces to back that up. So I might as well have just been sat there watching a POV of the ride. It genuinely did nothing for me. And then in examples like Hero and Mandrill Mayhem, I know, even just saying Hero, I've somehow summoned more angry mobs outside. There is the whole population of the world currently outside of my window because of these controversial opinions here. But I think Hero's roughness makes it a better ride because it's so rough and bumpy and jolty and everything that it makes it a really fun ride. What's that? Fun? Sorry, let me introduce the coaster community to the concept of fun. A ride is supposed to be fun. Not everything needs to be hyper-analysed and like, oh, there's a slight bump in the track right at the bottom of one of Hyperia's valleys. That ruins the whole ride! No, rides are supposed to be fun. You're supposed to enjoy yourself. You're supposed to be thrown around and rattled a bit, because that's part of the experience. If you aren't rattled, you might as well just sit in your chair and watch a video. There is no point of going on a ride if it's going to be perfectly smooth but then offer absolutely nothing in return. Anyway, I could rattle on about this, pun fully intended, for another half an hour, but I'm going to call this video there. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed what you saw, don't press the subscribe button. It will blow up Colossus and no one wants that. If you want to see maybe a second part with more controversial opinions, because trust me, I've got tons, let me know. Or don't, and I'll read your mind to find out. Anyway, goodbye, everyone.